I agreed to meet a man I had connected with on a professional networking site. We had exchanged messages over several weeks, discussing the possibility of a job opportunity in his company. He seemed friendly and knowledgeable, and I was eager for a chance to prove myself. When he suggested meeting at a local coffee shop for an informal interview, I thought it was a good idea. The place was quiet, with a comfortable atmosphere, which seemed perfect for a conversation. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a confident smile. He ordered us both coffee, and the smell of fresh beans filled the air. I felt hopeful as we started talking about the job and my experience. The conversation was pleasant at first, and I thought this might turn into something real. Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. After a few minutes, I noticed he was staring at me oddly, his smile lingering too long. I felt a bit uneasy, but tried to focus on what he was saying about the company's goals. When he handed me the cup of coffee, I took a sip without hesitation. Shortly after, I began to feel dizzy, like the room was spinning slowly. My limbs felt heavy, and my thoughts started to blur. I realized something was wrong, and I tried to stay alert, but the drug was working too fast. I wanted to get up and leave, but my body betrayed me. I managed to whisper a question, asking what was in the drink, but he just smiled and leaned closer. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was his face, calm but cold. I lost consciousness, unable to move or speak. When I woke up, I was in a different place, a small, dimly lit room. The walls were bare, and the air was thick with a strange metallic smell. Panic surged through me as I tried to move, but my wrists and ankles were bound. I struggled against the restraints, my heart pounding loudly in my ears. Fear mixed with confusion, and I wondered how long I had been unconscious. I called out for help, hoping someone nearby would hear me, but only silence answered. The man from the coffee shop was nowhere to be seen, and I had no idea where I was or why I was taken. My mind raced through every possible scenario, trying to find a way out or remember anything that might help. I realized I needed to stay calm if I wanted to survive this ordeal. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time felt strange in that place. Eventually, the door opened, and he stepped inside with a smug expression. He explained in a cold, detached voice that I was now part of an experiment he was conducting. The job interview was just a cover to lure me into this trap. He wanted to test how far someone could be pushed under pressure and drugs. I felt a surge of anger and terror all at once. I told him I would fight, that I would find a way out no matter what. He seemed amused by my determination, but that did not stop him from leaving me alone again. This time I tried to think clearly, focusing on any possible weakness in the restraints or the room. I noticed a small vent near the ceiling and started planning how to reach it. Over the next day, I gathered strength and patience, trying to conserve energy while searching for an opportunity. I listened carefully to every sound outside the door, memorizing patterns and timing. When the man returned, I forced myself to stay calm and pretend to be weaker than I was. I watched his movements closely, waiting for the moment he would be careless. That moment came when he opened the door to bring me food. I twisted my wrist sharply and managed to free one hand from the binding. My heart pounded as I grabbed the keys from his belt and unlocked the rest of my restraints. I waited until he was distracted, then sprinted toward the door and pushed it open. The hallway was dim, but I could see an exit sign down the corridor. I ran as fast as I could, ignoring the pain in my muscles and the fear in my chest. I heard footsteps behind me, but I did not look back. I reached the main entrance and saw the street lights glowing through the glass doors. With a desperate push, I opened them and stepped outside into the cool night air. I was free, but still trembling from the experience. I did not stop running until I found a nearby store that was open late. I rushed inside and asked the clerk to call 911 immediately. While waiting for the police to arrive, I explained everything, trying to stay composed. The officers took my statement seriously and promised to investigate the place where I had been held. I felt relief knowing that help was on its way. In the days that followed, I slowly recovered from the trauma and tried to piece together what had happened. The man was arrested, and authorities found evidence of other victims. I cooperated fully with the investigation, determined to make sure he could not hurt anyone else. Despite the fear I still carried, I found strength in knowing I survived and spoke out. This experience changed me, making me more cautious but also stronger. I learned to trust my instincts more and never ignore warning signs. Meeting strangers, even in professional settings, now feels different, and I am careful about who I allow into my life. Yet, I refuse to let fear control me or stop me from pursuing my goals. I survived something terrible, and that gives me power. Life moved forward slowly but surely. I went back to job hunting, choosing safer ways to connect with people. Each interview became a test of both my skills and my judgment. I remembered the lesson I learned that night: not everyone who smiles is kind. But I also remembered my own courage, which helped me escape and live to tell the story. That is something no one can take away. Story 2. Orseu. I worked in adult film production for several years, a world most people only glimpsed through rumor or gossip. The sets were always busy, full of energy and a strange mix of professionalism and chaos. Everyone had their roles and responsibilities, but sometimes things did not go as planned. On one particular day, something happened that left me unsettled for a long time afterward. The shoot was scheduled to start at 9 in the morning. Everyone had arrived on time except one actress. She was usually punctual, reliable, and never missed a call. I tried calling her several times, but the phone went straight to voicemail. There was no message or explanation. We decided to push forward without her. The director seemed frustrated but determined to keep the day on schedule. We rearranged scenes to accommodate the missing actress's absence. Some crew members whispered quietly about her disappearance, but nobody really knew what to think. It was not like her to simply vanish without notice. I felt a chill when I realized that something was off. Later in the day, the footage from the previous shoot was reviewed. It was routine, part of our quality control process. The previous shoot had wrapped late the night before, and we usually checked for any errors or issues. When I watched the footage, my heart skipped a beat. The missing actress was still there. She never left. The footage showed her on set, finishing her scenes and then staying on. There were moments when she was just sitting quietly off to the side, watching the others. It was not like her to linger after work was done. She did not pack up her things or say goodbye to anyone, but it was as if she had disappeared into the shadows of the studio. I felt a deep unease as I replayed those moments again and again. How could she be missing if the footage showed her there all along? Had she left the building at all? Nobody had seen her leave, and her phone was still unreachable. Something about this felt more than just a scheduling mishap. I started asking questions. The production manager and I searched the building from top to bottom. Every room, every closet, every corner was checked. There was no sign of her. Her car was still in the parking lot. The front doors were locked and secured. If she had left, it was a mystery how she had done so unnoticed. I began to wonder if anyone else had seen her leave or stay behind. The atmosphere on set grew tense. The crew whispered theories, some joking, others seriously concerned. Had something happened to her between shoots? Was she hiding? Or was there something else going on that no one dared to admit? I could feel eyes on me, as if everyone expected me to find the answers. But I had no clues. That night I stayed late to review more footage, hoping for a hint or explanation. The recording showed her movements clearly. She had not left the studio at all. She simply remained where no one had noticed. At one point, the camera caught her sitting in a corner, looking tired and distant. It was the last image of her on tape. I contacted the police the next day. I gave them all the information and the footage. They arrived quickly and began their investigation. The building was searched thoroughly again. Interviews were conducted with every person on set. It felt like a scene from a movie, but it was terrifyingly real. The missing actress had vanished without a trace. Days passed and there was no sign of her. No phone calls, no messages, no sightings. The mystery deepened. The studio tried to move on with new projects, but the shadow of her disappearance lingered. I could not stop thinking about her last moments caught on film. Why had she stayed behind? What had happened to her after the cameras stopped rolling? One evening I returned to the studio alone. I walked through the quiet halls and empty rooms. The silence was heavy, as if the walls themselves held a secret. I reached the corner where the footage showed her last sitting. The spot felt cold and still. A strange feeling washed over me, as if she was still there waiting. I sat down and closed my eyes. Memories of her laughter and presence flooded my mind. It was hard to believe someone so full of life could disappear without explanation. I realized then that sometimes the most visible things are the easiest to overlook. And the missing actress was a reminder of that fragile truth. In the end, the investigation closed with no answers. The case went cold. The studio moved on, but I never did. I carried the weight of that mystery with me, a silent reminder of the day the footage told a story no one could understand. Sometimes the camera captures more than just images. It captures truths we are not ready to face. Story 3. When I first saw the job listing for a private chef in a secluded estate, it sounded like a dream. The pay was generous, accommodations were included, and the client requested exclusive in-house service. I had worked for some wealthy people before, but this was on another level. The recruiter mentioned discretion was key, and that the employer valued privacy above all. The mansion was nestled in the hills, far from any town. A long, winding road led up to an iron gate, which opened automatically once I arrived. The property was massive, bordered by dense woods and surrounded by high stone walls. It gave off a sense of grandeur, but also an eerie kind of isolation. A tall man greeted me at the front door without a smile. He looked me over in silence and gestured for me to follow him inside. The house was beautiful, filled with expensive art and marble floors that echoed our footsteps. He explained that I would be cooking for the family of 4 and that they had very particular tastes. I was taken to the kitchen, which looked like something out of a high-end culinary school. Fully stocked, with every appliance I could imagine, it seemed like a chef's paradise. I was given a schedule and shown to my room in the staff wing of the mansion. I noticed there were no other staff members around, which felt odd for such a large home. The first few days went smoothly. I prepared meals as requested and delivered them to the dining room, where the family always ate in silence. They never spoke to me directly, only communicated through the tall man who had greeted me. He told me what they wanted and when, and I did as I was told. Despite the lack of interaction, I was content. I had a steady routine, and I was cooking in a beautiful kitchen. But little things began to catch my attention. The windows in my quarters were sealed shut, and my phone had no signal inside the house. I asked the man about the lack of cell reception, and he simply told me the walls were thick and the location remote. When I asked about Wi-Fi, he told me it was not available for staff. Something about the way he said it made me drop the subject. After a week, I started noticing other strange things. There were surveillance cameras everywhere, even in the kitchen and hallways. At night, I heard locks click into place, as if doors were being bolted shut from the outside. I tried to leave my room one night, only to find the door locked. I banged on the door, thinking it was a mistake, but no one answered. The next morning it was unlocked again, and the man acted like nothing had happened. I asked him about it, but he stared at me coldly and said I should not wander at night. From then on, I kept my questions to myself. The family remained distant and silent, always watching but never speaking. They stared at me while I served their food, their eyes following my every move. It was unsettling, but I reminded myself that I needed the money and tried to focus on my work. I began keeping notes in my head, trying to remember details in case I needed to tell someone later. The tall man never left my side when I was outside my room or the kitchen. He followed me everywhere, his presence constant and unnerving. One day I managed to slip away while he was distracted by a phone call. I made my way to the front door, only to find it locked. Every door and window I tried was sealed tight. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized I was trapped. When the man found me trying to force open a window in the laundry room, his demeanor changed. He did not yell or threaten me. He simply said that I was here for the long term and that my cooperation would make things easier. That night, I cried in my bed, feeling more like a prisoner than an employee. I thought about my family, my friends, and how no one knew where I really was. My phone was still dead, and there was no landline in my room. I had no way to contact the outside world. I started noticing changes in the food I was asked to prepare. Raw meats with strange textures, herbs I had never seen, and instructions to mix ingredients in specific ways. The family began requesting these meals at odd hours, sometimes at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. One night I heard chanting coming from the main dining room. I pressed my ear to the door and listened as low voices echoed through the halls. It sounded ritualistic, and I could hear the clinking of silverware and the shuffle of feet. The next morning, the dining room was spotless, and the family looked more drained than usual. Dark circles under their eyes, skin pale and damp. When I served breakfast, the man told me to prepare a new dish with animal organs I had never cooked before. I was disgusted but followed the instructions. It was becoming clear that this job was not just about food. Something sinister was happening in that house, and I was caught in the middle of it. Every time I tried to find a way out, I was blocked. Weeks passed, and my sense of time began to warp. The man stopped pretending to be polite and started issuing orders with a firm, cold tone. I was no longer treated as a guest or even an employee. I was a tool, something to be used. I noticed a room near the basement with a keypad lock. Each time I passed it, I heard low humming sounds and sometimes whispers. I tried to memorize the beeps of the code when the man opened it one day. I replayed the pattern in my head for hours. Late one night, I woke to silence and realized my door was unlocked. My heart pounded as I crept through the hallways, heading for the keypad room. I input the code I thought I had heard, and the light turned green. Inside was a control room filled with monitors. Every room of the mansion was displayed on screens, including mine. Files lined the shelves with names, photos, and notes. Some of the photos showed people who had worked here before, with the word "terminated" stamped across them. I took photos of everything with a hidden camera I had found in the kitchen drawer. I stuffed some documents into my apron and slipped out of the room. As I turned the corner to head back, I ran into the man. He stared at me, his face unreadable. He grabbed my arm tightly and said I had made a mistake. I pulled the pepper jar from my pocket and threw the contents in his eyes. He yelled and staggered back, giving me just enough time to run. I darted through the halls and found an unlocked exit in the garage. I ran barefoot through the woods, the branches cutting my feet, but I did not stop. I ran until I saw the lights of a road. A passing truck stopped when they saw me waving frantically. The driver helped me into the cab and called 911. Police arrived soon after, and I told them everything. It took days of debriefing and questioning before they acted on the information. When they raided the mansion, it was empty. The family and the man had vanished without a trace. The documents and footage I had taken helped launch a federal investigation. They found signs of cult activity, financial fraud, and human trafficking links. I was placed in witness protection for my safety. I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, haunted by the memory of their eyes watching me. But I survived. I escaped. And now, with a new name and a new life, I try to rebuild. Or cooking again, but only for those I choose to trust. Story 4. The house was larger than I expected. It sat on the edge of a quiet road, partially hidden behind a row of pines with a wide gravel driveway and a covered porch that looked out over the woods. The man who hired me barely spoke during the interview, just gave me a set of keys and a printed list of chores. He had emphasized privacy and discretion, promising a generous paycheck if I followed the rules. I had nowhere else to go, so I accepted without asking too many questions. Inside, the place was clean but cold, decorated in old-fashioned furniture and faded rugs. My room was on the second floor, simple and neat, with a small window that overlooked the back of the property. I spent the afternoon unpacking and exploring, taking note of where the kitchen supplies were kept and how the laundry machines worked. I did not see much of the man who owned the house after he showed me around. He told me he would be gone most of the time and preferred to be left alone when home. As night fell, the house grew quiet in a way that made every creak of the floorboards feel loud. I found myself checking the locks twice before heading to bed, uneasy but unsure why. It was not fear exactly, more like a weight pressing against my chest, something unspoken lingering in the air. I told myself it was just nerves, a new job, a strange place, too much silence. I could not sleep. The mattress was firm, The blanket's clean, but my eyes refused to close for long. Around 11, I heard a sound like something heavy dragging against concrete. It came from below the floorboards, slow and rhythmic, then stopped. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it came again. Curiosity got the better of me. I slipped out of bed and grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. The main hallway was dark, except for the small nightlight near the stairs. I walked softly, listening for any other noise, but everything was still now. When I reached the kitchen, I paused because I realized I had no idea where the cellar door was. I searched along the baseboards until I found a narrow door behind the pantry shelf. It was locked with a heavy padlock, but the ring of keys I had included one that fit. The lock clicked open louder than I liked. The door creaked as I opened it, revealing steep wooden steps leading down into darkness. The air grew colder with every step. I kept the flashlight pointed ahead, the beam cutting through the shadows to reveal stone walls and shelves stacked with old jars and boxes. It looked like a normal cellar at first, but then I heard it again, that dragging sound, followed by a faint moan. I turned the light and caught sight of something near the far wall. A figure, half hidden behind an old shelf, crouched low with hands bound in chains that ran through a bolt in the floor. She looked up when the light hit her, squinting like she had not seen brightness in days. Her clothes were torn, her skin bruised, and her eyes wide with terror. I froze, unsure what to say or do. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. She shook her head frantically, whispering something I could not hear. I stepped closer, and she started crying. That broke me out of my shock. I knelt beside her and tried to examine the chains. They were thick and rusted, locked with a padlock that did not match any key on my ring. I asked her who she was, but she only whispered please over and over again. Her wrists were raw from where the metal rubbed against her skin. I promised her I would help. I ran back upstairs and searched every drawer in the house. I found an old toolbox in the garage and grabbed the heaviest bolt cutters I could carry. Back in the cellar, I tried the lock, but it would not give. I tried sawing through the chain, but the angle was bad and the sound made her flinch. I told her to hang on, that I would call the police. But the phone in the kitchen had no dial tone. My cell phone, which worked fine earlier, showed no service. I tried walking out to the driveway, but the air was thick and heavy, and the trees seemed to crowd closer around the house. I thought about driving to town, but the man's car was still parked in the garage, and I realized mine was locked in by the gate, which I now noticed was chained shut from the outside. Panic started to set in. I could not leave. I could not call for help. I went back down and sat with the woman, trying to keep her calm while I figured out what to do. I asked her how long she had been down here, but she only shook her head and whispered that he would come back soon. That was when I heard the front door open upstairs. Footsteps moved across the floor above us, slow and deliberate. I turned off the flashlight and crouched beside her in the dark, barely breathing. The footsteps paused near the kitchen, then moved toward the pantry. The door to the cellar creaked open again, and I could hear him coming down the stairs. I grabbed a piece of broken wood from the floor and waited. When his shadow appeared on the final step, I swung. The hit landed against his arm, and he stumbled back with a grunt. I pushed past him and ran. I had no plan, just pure fear propelling me up the stairs and toward the garage. I remembered the toolbox and grabbed a wrench this time. He followed me, slower now, probably dazed. I ducked behind the workbench and waited until he got close, then hit him again. This time he went down hard. I tied his hands with the extension cord and ran back to the cellar. It took time, but I finally cut through the chain. She was too weak to walk, so I helped her up the stairs, one step at a time. We made it to the car, and I found the remote to open the gate hanging from the visor. As soon as the gate creaked open, I drove. I did not stop until I saw a gas station, and from there I called 911. The police met us minutes later. They arrested the man from the house without a struggle. The woman was taken to the hospital, and I gave my statement to the officers. I stayed with her until her family was contacted. She had been missing for months. In the weeks that followed, I tried to forget, but it stayed with me. Her face, the sound of those chains, the cold air of the cellar. I was offered counseling and took it. I also got a new job, nothing fancy but quiet and safe. Sometimes I still hear the sound of dragging chains in my dreams, but I sleep better now knowing she is free. I never went back to that house, and I never planned to. Whatever darkness lived there, it lost its grip the night she and I walked away. Story 5. He told me from the start that he liked things a little rough. I was not exactly innocent when it came to that kind of stuff, so I nodded and told him I was okay with it. Our first few nights together were passionate but intense, filled with biting, scratching, and a bit of choking. It was never anything too far beyond the edge, at least not at first. I trusted him because he was always careful to stop when I said so. But over time, though, the intensity began to rise. He started pushing limits that I had not agreed to push. Sometimes he would slap me without warning, or press his hand on my throat just a little too long. I would pull away and say something, and he would laugh it off like I was being dramatic. I told myself he was just playing and that he did not mean any harm. It is easy to ignore red flags when you think you are in love. I kept telling myself that he would never truly hurt me. He was always sweet and affectionate outside of the bedroom. He opened doors for me, brought me coffee in the mornings, and kissed my forehead when I was tired. But behind closed doors, things felt different, darker, even if I could not say why. I found myself flinching when he got too close sometimes. My friends noticed the bruises and I made excuses. I told them we got carried away or that it was consensual. That was mostly true, at least at the beginning. Still, a small voice inside me was growing louder, telling me something was off. The change came when I was looking for his phone charger one night. He was asleep, snoring lightly, and I didn't want to wake him. I opened the drawer in his nightstand and saw it sitting right on top. But underneath the charger was something I was never meant to find. It was a folder filled with newspaper clippings, printed photos, and a flash drive. My stomach twisted as I flipped through the pages. The headlines told me more than I wanted to know. One article was about a woman who had died during what authorities called a consensual encounter gone wrong. Her bruises looked eerily similar to mine. I stared at her photo, feeling the blood drain from my face. She was smiling in the picture, so full of life, probably just like I had been. The story described how her partner had claimed it was an accident, that she liked things rough and it had gone too far. But he had disappeared before police could question him again. I looked closer at the grainy photo of the man and felt my breath catch. It was him. A little younger, his hair shorter, but it was him. I dropped the folder back into the drawer and shut it quickly, hoping the sound would not wake him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I climbed into bed and lay stiff beside him until the morning light crept through the window. The next day I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. I watched him carefully, trying to spot any cracks in his mask. Every smile he gave me felt forced. Every touch made my skin crawl. I could not confront him without proof, but I also could not pretend everything was fine. That folder haunted me every time I looked at him. When he left for work, I grabbed the flash drive and went to my friend's house. She had a laptop and helped me open the files. Most of them were harmless photos and documents, but one folder was locked with a password. I guessed at a few things until I tried the name from one of the articles. It opened. Inside were videos. Some were of us, which made my skin crawl. But there were others. I could only watch one before I felt like I was going to throw up. It was her, the girl from the article. And it was him, doing things to her that no one should ever do. I backed away from the screen, hands shaking. My friend looked just as pale as I felt. We knew we had to go to the police. There was no more room for doubt. This was not a misunderstanding or a rough night gone too far. This was a crime. At the station, I handed over everything. They took it seriously right away. The detective asked me questions about our relationship and his behavior. I told them everything, from the first night to the folder in the drawer. They told me I had done the right thing. He was arrested 2 days later. I had to go into hiding for a while because they feared he might try to find me if he made bail. But he never did. The evidence was too strong. The videos were enough to put him away for a long time. I testified at his trial. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I had to watch some of those videos again, had to explain every bruise, every scream. But I got through it, and in the end, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life, no chance of parole. I cried when the verdict was read, but they were tears of relief. I was finally free. He could never touch me again. It took time to feel safe again. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming he is standing over me. But those dreams are getting fewer. I started going to therapy and slowly began to trust again. Not just others, but myself. The scariest part was realizing how easily I could have become her. How close I had come to being another headline. But I made it out. I listened to that voice in my head when it mattered most. And because of that, I am still here. I do not blame myself for staying as long as I did. Love can blind you to danger. But I also know now that real love never feels like fear. Real love does not leave bruises or make you question your worth. I am learning what real love is, and it starts with me. He is behind bars where he belongs. I walk a little taller knowing that. The darkness he carried is not mine to hold anymore. I am free, and I will never let anyone take that from me again. Story 6. I had been on the site for weeks, chatting with people who seemed like-minded and respectful. When I received an invitation to a private party, the message was polite, confident, and full of reassurances. It was described as a kink-friendly event, one where discretion was paramount and boundaries were strictly honored. After exchanging more messages and confirming safety protocols, I allowed myself to feel a little excited. The address was for a large house on the outskirts of the city, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. I arrived just after 9 p.m., dressed according to the host's suggested code. The exterior looked normal, maybe even charming, with soft lighting and a freshly trimmed lawn. A tall man at the door checked my ID and smiled as he welcomed me in. Inside, the house was dimly lit, with music playing at a low volume. There were a few other guests mingling, drinks in hand, wearing masks or outfits that hinted at their preferred roles. Nothing seemed out of place at first. I was handed a drink by a woman who introduced herself using a safe word as part of the greeting, and I took that as another sign that this was legitimate. We were told to leave our phones in a locked box in the foyer for privacy. I hesitated but noticed everyone else complying without question. I reminded myself I had done my research and spoken to the host extensively. I placed my phone inside the padded container and secured it with the provided code. A woman in a red robe led us into what she called the consent circle. There, we were encouraged to state our boundaries and comfort levels. Each person gave a short statement, and the host repeated that consent was ongoing and could be revoked at any time. It felt organized, structured, and safe. After the circle, we were split into smaller groups based on shared interests. I followed my group to a lounge downstairs that was softly lit with candles and covered in cushions and curtains. There was gentle music, and the mood felt calm. The host reappeared and offered us a new round of drinks, smiling as he walked among us. I only took a few sips of the second drink before I started feeling strange. My head grew heavy, and my limbs felt too light, almost like I was floating in place. I tried to speak, but the words came out thick and slow. Others around me seemed affected too, their heads lolling or their movements growing sluggish. Panic began to rise in me, but I could barely lift my arms. One woman collapsed beside me, her eyes wide and unfocused. I tried to get to my feet but crumpled back onto the cushions. The last thing I remember clearly was the host kneeling in front of me with a kind smile brushing hair from my face. When I woke up, it was morning. I was in a small, windowless room with a concrete floor and a metal door. My clothes were gone, replaced with a plain cotton shift. I had no idea how long I had been out. My throat was dry, and my head pounded. The door opened, and a woman entered carrying a clipboard. She asked me how I felt, as if I were in a hospital. I asked where I was, but she ignored the question and said I had been selected for a different kind of experience. I could barely process her words. The next few days blurred together. I was kept in that room, given small meals, and monitored constantly. They asked me questions that made no sense, like what I believed about control, about obedience, about pain. Each answer I gave seemed to lead to another round of questioning or some kind of strange reward or punishment. I was not the only one there. Sometimes I would hear others screaming or crying through the walls. Once I caught a glimpse of a man being led down the hall in chains, his eyes hollow and lost. The woman with the clipboard always spoke in the same calm tone, never reacting to my pleas or anger. I began to wonder if I would ever leave. Every time I asked to go, I was told I was not ready yet. They said I had not completed my transformation. I tried to resist their games, their questions, but the lack of sleep and constant manipulation wore me down. One night, a different woman came into my room. She whispered that she had once been in my place. She told me there was a way out, but it would only come if I pretended to comply. She said they were always watching, and that I had to make them believe I was broken. I started playing along. I smiled when they entered, answered their questions with the responses I thought they wanted. I acted compliant, even when every part of me wanted to scream. Slowly, I was moved to a different area of the building with more freedom. The new space had a communal area where we could interact, always under supervision. I kept up my act, and eventually I met another person who had the same plan. They had been pretending longer than I had. Together we watched, waited, and mapped out patterns in the guards' movements. One afternoon, the power went out. The lights flickered and then died completely. Alarms buzzed in the distance, and I felt a surge of hope. My companion grabbed my hand and we ran down a service hallway we had seen unlocked once before. There was chaos all around. We made it to a back exit, one that led into a field overgrown with weeds and scattered trash. I did not stop running until I saw a road. A car slowed when I flagged it down, and the driver, seeing my state, called 911. I collapsed as soon as I heard the dispatcher's voice. At the hospital, they treated me for dehydration and exhaustion. Police questioned me, but it took time for them to believe everything I said. Look, I gave them every detail I remembered, even though it made me feel sick to speak it aloud. Eventually, they raided the house and found what was left. Some of the others were still there, including the host. He was calm when arrested, like none of this mattered. The news reported it as a cult-like operation disguised as private events. Dozens of victims were identified, many of whom had been missing for years. I went through months of therapy. The nightmares took longer to fade. But I survived. I never blamed myself, not fully, because the trap was too carefully made, too perfectly designed to lure people in. Now I speak to others about what happened. Quietly, carefully, but with purpose. I work with organizations that help survivors and expose dangerous groups like the one I escaped from. Every time someone listens, I feel a little stronger. I know now that I was not the first, but I made sure I was the last. Story 7. I had always been self-conscious about my appearance. For years, I saved money, skipped vacations, and denied myself small pleasures so I could finally afford the procedure. A popular clinic overseas caught my attention with its glowing reviews and discreet services. I booked a consultation, packed my bags, and boarded a flight filled with both excitement and dread. When I arrived, a representative met me at the airport holding a simple sign with my name on it. They did not speak much, only nodding and guiding me into a sleek black vehicle. The drive took longer than expected, and I lost track of where we were. The scenery gradually changed from busy streets to quiet, winding roads lined with tall trees. Eventually, we pulled up to a building that looked more like a private residence than a medical facility. The exterior was pristine, modern, and minimalist, with no signage. I asked questions, but the driver remained silent and gestured for me to go inside. My stomach churned with nerves, but I reminded myself that high-end clinics often operated with strict privacy. Inside, the reception area was spotless and quiet, the lighting soft and calming. A woman in a white coat greeted me and handed me a clipboard with forms to fill out. I noticed that none of the paperwork mentioned a clinic name or location. It felt strange, but I pushed the thought aside and completed the forms. After the paperwork, I was shown to a private room and told to rest. The room was simple but comfortable, with no windows. I laid down, and a nurse came in to place an IV into my arm. I asked when the surgery would be, but she only smiled and said everything would be taken care of soon. The last thing I remembered was the sensation of drifting off as the anesthesia took hold. There were no vivid dreams, only a sudden jolt when I woke up again. I was in a different room now, dimly lit and cooler than before. My body felt heavy, and I could sense bandages wrapped tightly around my face. I reached up to touch the bandages, but my arms felt sluggish. A machine nearby beeped softly, and a nurse appeared almost immediately. She told me not to move and assured me that everything had gone well. Her voice was flat, rehearsed, and devoid of warmth. I asked what time it was, but she did not answer. I asked where I was, and she turned and left the room without a word. The air in the room felt thick, almost stale, and I noticed there were no clocks, no windows, and no signs of other patients. The walls were bare, painted in a dull shade of gray. The next time someone entered, it was another nurse I had not seen before. He checked my vitals, scribbled something on a clipboard, and avoided eye contact. I tried to sit up, but he gently pushed me back down. He muttered that the doctor would see me soon and quickly left the room. Days passed, or at least I assumed they had. It was impossible to track time in that place. Our meals were brought in at regular intervals, but no one spoke to me beyond short, scripted phrases. I still had no idea where I was or who had operated on me. Eventually, the bandages were removed. A mirror was brought in, and I was left alone with it. My reflection looked different, almost too different. I could not recognize myself fully, even though I knew the procedures I had requested. There was a strange tightness in my jaw and around my eyes. My features were symmetrical, too perfect in some unnatural way. I touched my face and felt smooth skin beneath my fingertips, but it felt foreign. The person staring back at me could have been a stranger. I pressed the call button and waited for someone to come. When the nurse arrived, I demanded to know the name of the doctor and the location of the clinic. She stared at me blankly and repeated that I was recovering well and should not stress myself. I grabbed her arm, but she slipped away quickly and exited the room. That was the moment I knew something was deeply wrong. I got up and tried to leave my room, but the door was locked from the outside. I banged on it, shouted, and even tried to break the handle, but it was solid and unyielding. No one came, not even to ask me to quiet down. Later, I found a small vent near the ceiling and climbed onto the bed to peer through it. I could hear voices from another room, hushed and hurried. Words like subject and transfer were spoken, sending chills through me. I backed away, heart racing, realizing I might not be a patient but something else. When I woke the next morning, my room had changed. My belongings were gone, and in their place was a new set of clothes. A note lay on the bed, written in perfect script, stating that I was ready for the next stage. I tore the note to pieces and began searching for another way out. Eventually, I discovered a panel in the bathroom that came loose when I tugged hard enough. Behind it was a narrow crawl space leading into darkness. I hesitated, but staying felt worse than the unknown. I squeezed through, crawling on my hands and knees, scraping against metal and dust. After what felt like hours, I emerged into a dim hallway with flickering lights. The walls were lined with doors, each marked only by a number. I moved quietly, trying handles, listening for sounds. Some rooms were empty, others occupied by people in various states of sedation. I wanted to help them, but I knew I could not help anyone if I got caught. I kept moving until I found a door marked exit. I pushed it open and was met with the cold night air and a dense forest surrounding the building. There were no roads, no lights, no sign of civilization. I ran blindly through the trees, driven by panic and desperation. The branches tore at my clothes and skin, But I did not stop. Hours later, I stumbled onto a dirt path and followed it until I reached a small village. The people there stared at me strangely, whispering as I passed. I found someone who spoke a little English and convinced them to let me use their phone. I called the embassy and explained my situation as best I could. They sent someone to retrieve me the next day, but even they could not identify the clinic from my description. It simply did not exist on any map. Back home, I tried to trace the clinic online, but the website had vanished. The contact numbers were disconnected, and the email bounced back undelivered. My bank could not trace the payment, and there was no record of the transaction. It was as if the entire experience had been erased. The changes to my face remained, though. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a version of myself that felt manufactured. People complimented my appearance, not knowing the horror behind it. I smiled politely, but inside I was haunted by the place that had taken more than just my old face. I eventually learned to live with the reflection, to accept what had been done. But I never stopped searching, hoping to find the clinic and understand what had really happened. Each lead brought only dead ends and more questions. Still, I kept looking. Then one day, years later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo of me taken the day I arrived at the clinic. On the back, a single sentence was written: "You were never meant to leave." I burned the letter and the photo, watching the flames consume the final proof. I knew then that some places were never meant to be found again. And some transformations change far more than the surface. Story 8. I was desperate for cash. Rent was overdue and my fridge was practically empty. My job barely covered my bills, and my side hustles were drying up. Every day felt like a new kind of panic. I was constantly calculating how many days I had left before everything caved in. One night, while scrolling through job ads, I found something strange. It promised quick, easy money for a few hours of work. The post was vague but intriguing, just enough to make me pause. It mentioned a private film, nothing explicit in the description, only that it was high-paying and confidential. My mind hesitated, but my empty wallet pushed me forward. I emailed the contact and got a response in less than an hour. The message was polite, professional even, and asked me to come for a short meeting. It said the job was not illegal, and I could walk away at any time. I told myself it was probably something weird but harmless. My gut twisted as I agreed to meet the next afternoon. The place was in a quiet part of town, a small office in a business complex. It looked normal, even boring, which helped calm my nerves. Inside, a man greeted me with a clipboard and a kind smile. He explained that the project was for a niche audience, filmed privately, and that my face could be blurred if I chose. All I had to do was follow a script and act a certain way. The amount they offered was more than I made in 2 months. I tried not to look too eager as I signed the release form. They asked if I was sure, and I nodded, repeating to myself that it was just acting. I could pretend, play a part, and then walk away with enough money to breathe again. It felt like a lifeline, even if it was an unusual one. The film shoot happened the next day in a well-lit studio with a basic set. There was nothing outright disturbing, but it was definitely personal, awkward. I had to say and do things that made me uncomfortable, but the crew remained distant and professional. I kept reminding myself of the money. When it was over, they handed me an envelope filled with cash and thanked me for my time. Walking home, I told myself I had done what I needed to do. I could finally pay rent, stock up on groceries, and maybe have a bit left for emergencies. I deleted the contact information and tried to put it behind me, but something about it lingered in my mind. The feeling that I had crossed a line I could not uncross. Weeks went by and I started to feel normal again. I paid off some debts and even managed to smile more often. Life was not perfect, but it was better than before. Then one evening, I received an anonymous message. There was a short clip attached to it. My heart froze when I saw myself on screen. It was part of the private film, but with my face clearly visible. The message was short and terrifying. Pay or we send this to everyone you know. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen, unable to move. I thought it had been confidential. I had trusted them when they said I could remain anonymous. Now I was facing the threat of humiliation, of losing everything I had managed to rebuild. I replied with shaky fingers, asking what they wanted. The answer came almost immediately. They wanted 5 times what I had been paid. If I did not send it within 3 days, they said they would share the video online and with people close to me. I was filled with dread. I did not have that kind of money. And even if I did, what would stop them from coming back again? I started to panic. I barely slept that night, replaying the video in my mind over and over again. I thought about going to the police, but the shame held me back. I imagined the questions they would ask, the looks I would get. I had no proof, just a message and a video of myself I should have never made. The next morning, I tried to call the number from the original contact. It was disconnected. I searched for the company name but found nothing. It was like they had never existed. My hands trembled as I realized how careful they had been. I was trapped, and they knew it. By the second day, I decided to confide in someone. I picked someone I trusted, someone who had been through hard times like me. I told them everything, ashamed and broken. They listened without judgment and said something I had not considered, or fight back. Larson. They helped me document everything. Screenshots, timestamps, the video, the messages. We created a timeline and gathered what little evidence we had. Then we contacted a local advocacy group that dealt with online exploitation. They took me seriously and offered help. With their guidance, I filed a police report. It was terrifying, but I felt less alone. The officers treated me with respect and care. They said that blackmail cases like this were becoming more common. It gave me hope that I might not be ruined by this. Within a few weeks, they traced the messages back to a location out of state. It turned out I was not the only one who had been targeted. Others had come forward, and the investigation grew. They had been running a scheme, luring desperate people into these films and then extorting them. I felt a mix of relief and anger. Eventually, they were caught. The people behind the scheme were arrested, and the videos were removed from every platform they had appeared on. I received official notice that I would not be held responsible for anything, and that I was considered a victim, not a criminal. I cried when I read the letter. It felt like I could finally start over. Now I talk to others about what happened. I tell them to be careful, to ask questions, and never let desperation make decisions for them. What I went through was painful, but it taught me how to fight for myself. I am no longer ashamed of my past. I survived it, and that means more than anything. Life is not perfect, but it is mine again. I have a job that I like, a few trusted people by my side, and a sense of strength I never knew I had. I no longer wake up in fear. That chapter of my life is closed, and I refuse to let it define me. I chose to rise instead. Story 9. Most people think working for a dating app is about sifting through profile pictures and reading awkward bios, but that is just the surface. My job was a little darker. I was part of the team that ran background checks before profiles could go live. We combed through public records, criminal histories, and social media footprints to make sure no one with a dangerous past could sneak through. It was repetitive, methodical work, but I believed it made a difference. Sometimes I would see things that made my stomach turn. Assault charges, restraining orders, or active warrants were more common than most users would like to believe. When we found something serious, the profile was flagged and our internal security team would take over. Those cases usually ended quietly, and I never learned what happened after the alert was sent. That distance was comforting, necessary even. I had gotten good at separating the work from my emotions. You cannot afford to feel too much when you are constantly staring at people's worst mistakes. Most profiles passed inspection with nothing more than minor traffic violations or old college pranks. But I never let my guard down. One mistake could mean someone's safety was compromised. It started like any other afternoon. I was halfway through my queue and sipping lukewarm coffee that I had reheated twice already. A new profile came up with the usual bright photo and carefully written self-summary. Nothing about it stood out at first. Then I saw the face and felt my heart stop. It was a woman I had seen before, but not in a dating profile. I could not place it immediately, but there was something deeply familiar about her. I opened a second window and began cross-referencing her name, even though the profile showed no red flags. That nagging feeling in my chest would not go away. Something about her smile looked off, forced, like she was hiding behind it. After about 15 minutes of digging, I found it. A missing persons report filed 6 months earlier, complete with the same photo now used in her profile. The name on the report matched, but the last known location was across the country. She had vanished without a trace while walking home from work. Authorities had no leads. My hands trembled as I clicked through the public report. There was nothing to suggest she had left willingly. No signs of depression or distress. The police suspected foul play, but no suspects had ever been named. Seeing her face again on a dating app felt unreal, like something out of a movie. I double-checked the user data in our system. Whoever had made the profile was using a different city and a new phone number, but the email address was barely altered. Just one letter different. It was subtle, clever, enough to fool most filters, but not someone who had been staring at profiles every day for years. The account had just been created earlier that morning. That meant whoever set it up was probably still monitoring it. I flagged the profile immediately and alerted my supervisor. Usually that would be the end of it for me, but I could not let it go. I needed to know what was happening. That night I could not sleep. My mind kept returning to her face and the dozens of unanswered questions. Was she alive and trying to make contact? Or had someone stolen her identity for something worse? I knew I had no authority to investigate, but something inside me refused to let it go. The next day, I came in early and checked the flagged profile again. It had not been taken down yet, which meant our security team was still reviewing it. I requested an internal note update, hoping someone would provide context. All it said was pending further verification. That was not enough. I reached out to a contact I had from an old training seminar. He worked in law enforcement and owed me a favor from a previous case where our background check helped catch a fugitive. I sent him the profile and the missing persons report, keeping it as vague and professional as I could. Within minutes he responded, asking me to call him. When I did, his voice was grim. He told me the case had gone cold months ago and that the family had all but given up hope. They had suspected she might have been abducted, but there was never any evidence to support that theory. He said the information I sent would be forwarded to the original detective. He thanked me and promised to keep me updated. A few days passed with no news. The profile had been quietly removed from the app, and the username no longer existed in our database. Most of my coworkers never knew anything unusual had happened. But I kept checking the missing persons database, hoping for any update. I told myself I was just being thorough. Finally, almost a week later, I got a call from my contact. He said the original detective had traced the IP address used to create the dating profile. It was from a rural town several hundred miles from where the woman had disappeared. Local authorities were sent to the location tied to the registration. What they found shocked everyone. It was a small cabin, isolated and overgrown with trees. Inside, they found the woman alive, but in terrible condition. She had been held captive all this time. Her abductor had apparently grown careless, allowing her access to an old laptop. She had tried to create a dating profile as a cry for help, hoping someone might recognize her face. It was a desperate gamble. She was taken to a hospital and reunited with her family. The man who had taken her was arrested without incident. He had no previous record, no history of violence. Just a quiet loner with a dark secret. The authorities believed he had let his guard down out of arrogance or boredom. That mistake saved her life. I did not tell anyone at work about what had happened. There were no congratulations or dramatic announcements. It was better that way. The job was meant to be invisible, silent in its service. Still, I could not stop thinking about her. The courage it must have taken to create that profile, knowing it might be her only chance. The trust she had to place in total strangers to see her in act. I felt honored to have played a small part in her rescue. Now, when I go through profiles, I do it with a little more patience and a sharper eye. Every face could hold a story I do not know yet. Every detail could mean more than it seems. The work is still routine, still thankless. But I know now that sometimes it saves lives. Story 10. I was cleaning out my laptop one night when I stumbled across a folder I had not opened in years. It was buried under layers of other junk, hidden with a name only I would recognize. Curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked through it. Old photos, saved messages, and videos began loading. As I watched them flash across my screen, the pit in my stomach grew. He had recorded everything. Some of it I remembered consenting to. Some of it I absolutely did not. But what scared me more than the content was the memory of what he had said when we broke up. He had threatened to leak those videos if I ever spoke about what he did to me. I never believed he would follow through. He liked control, not exposure. He wanted me afraid, not free. And for a long time I lived that way. Quiet, careful, paranoid. Eventually, life went on. I got a new apartment, a better job, and slowly rebuilt my confidence. I dated again, cautiously at first, and I let myself believe I had escaped the worst of him. That folder should have been a reminder, but I closed it and tried to move on. Weeks later, I was at work during a quiet afternoon lull. A friend sent me a link to a bizarre website she stumbled upon late at night. It was one of those places people only whispered about, where videos got uploaded anonymously. She warned me it was disturbing, and I should not watch too much. I opened the link out of boredom more than interest. The layout was crude, almost outdated. Categories flashed across the top in bold, disorganized rows. I hovered over one labeled Private Confessions. A part of me clicked it just to see how ridiculous it could be. The screen loaded a series of thumbnails. The faces were often blurred, but I could tell some were not. Some were shot in obvious secrecy. And then my breath caught. One of the thumbnails looked too familiar. The walls, the sheets, even the light filtering through the blinds. I clicked it, heart pounding. The video started, and there I was. Not just once, but in full detail. Clear audio, the date stamp in the corner. It was one of the recordings from that folder, but I had never seen it edited that way. It had been trimmed, cut to make me look like I was doing something I wasn't. I slammed my laptop shut and stared at the wall. The floor beneath me may as well have vanished. I could not cry, not yet. My mind went blank, then raced with questions. Who else had seen this? How long had it been online? I forced myself to reopen the computer. I searched the site for more videos. There were 5 in total. All me. All taken at different times. Some when I knew, some when I did not. All uploaded by the same anonymous user. My hands shook as I searched the username across the internet. It led me to nothing useful. No profiles, no traces, just that one site. I took screenshots, saved the URLs, and began gathering everything I could. I knew I would have to go to the police. Walking into the station, I felt like I was walking into a courtroom naked. The shame, the fear, it clung to me. But I knew I could not let him win. I explained everything to the officer on duty, and she nodded patiently. She asked me to sit while she brought someone from cybercrime. The detective who arrived seemed skeptical at first. He asked if I had any proof the videos were not consented to. I showed him the clips, pointed out the timestamps, the places I never knew a camera had been. He grew quieter as he reviewed the evidence. They took my statement and said an investigation would begin. I was told not to expect fast results. These cases could take months, sometimes longer. But I was not waiting anymore. I contacted a lawyer, one who specialized in digital privacy violations. She promised she would do everything to push the case forward. I also started therapy. I needed to. The sense of betrayal, of being violated all over again, was too heavy to carry alone. The therapist helped me understand what I could not control, and what I could. Most importantly, she reminded me I still had power, even if it had been taken from me before. As the months went by, progress was slow but steady. The videos were taken down, though not before I sent several cease and desist letters. My lawyer managed to trace the payments from the site to a bank account. It was a small lead, but it cracked open the case. Eventually they found him. He had sold the videos using a fake name and redirected the profits through a digital wallet. The transaction history tied directly back to his real identity. When the police knocked on his door, he still had copies of the videos on his hard drive. He had even uploaded a few under another account. He was arrested and charged. The case went public. I did not want my name in the news, and thankfully, the court respected that. But he faced consequences, real ones. He was convicted for digital voyeurism and distribution without consent. I attended every court session. I stared straight ahead as he avoided my eyes. For once, he was not in control. He had always been so careful, so manipulative, thinking he would never get caught. But he did, because I refused to stay silent. After the sentencing, I walked out of that courthouse with a quiet kind of relief. It was not total peace, but it was something close. I changed my number, upgraded all my devices, and erased the folder from my laptop for good. This time, not out of fear, out of finality. People tell you healing is a straight line, but it is not. It comes in moments, in waves, in small victories. Mine came the day I looked in the mirror and saw someone who fought back. Someone who survived. Someone who reclaimed what had been taken. I never thought I would be the kind of person who went through something like this. But I did, and I came out stronger than I imagined possible. Not because I was fearless, but because I was tired of being afraid. And I learned that courage, real courage, is quiet and persistent and burns even in the darkest places. Story 11. Eon. I checked into a love motel with someone I met while on vacation. We had spent the day exploring the city, sharing stories and laughing like old friends. The chemistry between us was undeniable, and when he suggested we get a room for the night, I agreed without hesitation. The motel was cheap but clean, tucked away on a quiet street just far enough from the main tourist areas. I thought it was just going to be a brief, exciting adventure before returning to the familiar routine of my trip. The room was small but cozy, with a flickering neon sign visible through the window casting a strange glow on the walls. We talked for a while after checking in, our voices low and the atmosphere charged with anticipation. When the night grew late, we finally gave in to the moment, believing this could be the start of something new. I fell asleep feeling safe, comforted by the warmth beside me. It was a feeling I had not expected to have on this trip. When I woke up, the room was empty except for me. The man I came with was gone without a trace. I reached for my passport, which I always kept close, only to find the spot where it had been was now empty. A cold wave of panic hit me as I realized what had happened. I was alone in a strange room in a strange city, and my identification was missing. As I tried to process what was going on, I noticed movement in the corner of the room. My heart jumped as I saw someone else was there with me. It was a woman, her eyes wide and frightened, clutching a small bag to her chest. She seemed just as confused and scared as I was. Neither of us spoke at first, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. I asked her how she ended up here, and she told me a story that sounded eerily similar to mine. She had met a man while traveling, someone who promised her fun and safety, but instead left her stranded and vulnerable. She said she woke up just like I did, without her belongings and without any idea where the man had gone. It was clear we had both been victims of the same person. We quickly realized that if we wanted to get out of this situation, we needed to work together. We searched the room for clues, hoping to find something that might help us understand what was happening. The bathroom mirror had smudges that looked like hurried writing, and there was a faint smell of cigarette smoke in the air. It felt like the place had been used by someone who did not want to be found. With no phones and no passport, our options felt limited. We decided to check the motel lobby, hoping to find someone who could help us. The clerk was there, but his expression changed when he saw us. He told us the man had paid cash and left early in the morning, refusing to give any contact information. He seemed nervous, as if he knew more than he was letting on. We pressed him for details, and he finally admitted there had been rumors about a man who used the motel to trick travelers into leaving their passports behind. Some said he worked with others who used the documents to disappear or commit crimes. The clerk warned us to be careful and suggested we go to the police immediately. Hearing this only made us more determined to get out safely. Outside the motel, we found a public phone booth and called the local police. Explaining the situation was difficult because of language barriers, but eventually they understood. Officers arrived quickly and took our statements. They promised to investigate the man in the motel thoroughly. For the first time since waking up alone, I felt a sliver of hope. The police escorted us to a nearby safe place where we could rest and recover, and they arranged for temporary identification papers through the embassy so we could continue our trip or return home. The woman and I stayed close during this time, finding comfort in each other's company. We shared stories and fears, becoming unlikely friends bonded by an awful experience. Days later, the police contacted us with news that the man had been caught. He had been running a ring that exploited travelers by stealing their passports and using their identities. The investigation revealed many victims, and our cooperation had helped bring him to justice. It was a relief to know we were not alone in this and that the nightmare was finally over. Although the ordeal left scars, I refused to let it define me. I decided to continue my travels, but with greater caution and awareness. I learned how important it was to trust my instincts and to never ignore small warning signs. The experience taught me resilience and the strength that comes from facing fear head-on. In the end, what began as a frightening situation turned into a lesson in survival and friendship. I was grateful for the unexpected support of the woman I met in that motel room. Together, we had turned a nightmare into a story of hope and courage. I knew that no matter where I went next, I would carry that strength with me, ready to face whatever came my way. Story 12. I had just started seeing a man I met a few weeks earlier. Our conversations were easy, and the connection felt natural. When he suggested a weekend trip to a remote cabin, I hesitated at first, but then agreed. The idea of getting away from the city and spending time together sounded exciting. I packed lightly, not knowing what to expect. We arrived at the cabin late Friday afternoon. It was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by tall trees and silence. The air smelled fresh and cool, a welcome change from the noise of the city. The cabin itself was charming, rustic, but cozy, with a wood-burning stove and large windows. I felt a sense of peace settle over me as I stepped inside. He showed me around the cabin, pointing out the kitchen, the living room, and the bedrooms upstairs. The place was neat and well-maintained, everything in its place. We talked about our plans for the weekend, mostly about hiking and relaxing. The thought of spending 2 days in such a quiet place was comforting. I started to feel more at ease with him. That night, after dinner, we settled in the living room by the fire. We talked and laughed, sharing stories about our pasts and dreams for the future. The warmth of the fire and the glow of the candles made the room feel intimate. I noticed the walls were unusually thick and there was no sound from outside. The cabin was completely silent except for our voices. The next morning I woke early and went to explore the cabin on my own. I walked through the rooms, enjoying the quiet and the soft light coming through the windows. When I reached the bedroom, I noticed something odd. Under the bed, there was a small box. Curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled it out carefully. Inside the box were a pair of handcuffs. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at them for a moment, trying to understand what they were doing there. I felt a mix of confusion and unease. Why would anyone keep handcuffs under the bed? I wondered if it was some kind of joke or a forgotten prop. When he came into the room, I showed him the handcuffs. His reaction surprised me. He smiled and explained that the cabin was soundproof, designed for privacy and discretion. The handcuffs, he said, were part of a playful side of his personality. He wanted to make sure I was comfortable and safe, promising that nothing would happen without my consent. Still, I felt a knot in my stomach. The silence of the cabin suddenly felt heavier, and the walls seemed to close in. I asked more questions about the soundproofing, wanting to understand why it was there. He said it was to prevent noise from disturbing neighbors, but I sensed there was more to the story. Despite my doubts, I decided to stay. I told myself that trust was important in any relationship, especially new ones. We spent the day hiking nearby trails, enjoying the fresh air and beautiful scenery. The natural world outside was a stark contrast to the strange atmosphere inside the cabin. But that evening, as the sun set, we returned to the cabin. The silence greeted us like an old friend, thick and impenetrable. We talked about boundaries and expectations, trying to be open with each other. I felt torn between curiosity and caution. The handcuffs remained on my mind, a symbol of something I did not fully understand. Before going to bed, I asked if I could lock the bedroom door from the inside. He agreed without hesitation. The cabin's isolation made me want to feel safe and in control. I curled up under the blankets, listening to the quiet around me. Sleep was slow to come. In the middle of the night, I woke suddenly. The silence was broken by a faint noise outside the door. My heart pounded as I sat up and listened. The sound stopped quickly, leaving only the quiet once again. I wondered if it had been my imagination or something real. The next morning, I decided to talk honestly about how I felt. I told him the cabin and the handcuffs had made me uncomfortable. He listened carefully and apologized for not considering my feelings more deeply. He said he valued my trust and wanted the weekend to be a positive experience for both of us. We agreed to leave the cabin earlier than planned. Packing up, I felt relief mixed with disappointment. The weekend had started with promise but ended with unanswered questions. Still, I appreciated his willingness to listen and respect my boundaries. On the drive back to the city, the tension between us eased. We talked about what had happened and what it meant for our future. I realized that trust was fragile and required honesty. The experience at the cabin taught me more about myself and what I needed from a relationship. Looking back, the weekend was a turning point. It was a moment when I faced uncertainty and made choices for my well-being. The handcuffs under the bed were a strange discovery, but they led to important conversations. In the end, I left with a clearer sense of who I was and what I deserved. The cabin remained a quiet place in my memory, a symbol of both curiosity and caution. It was a reminder that sometimes what we do not expect can reveal what we truly need. I walked away knowing that trust, respect, and communication were the keys to any meaningful connection. Story 13. Working in hotel security was supposed to be a straightforward job. Mostly it involved routine checks, monitoring cameras, and making sure guests followed the rules. The building was old but well maintained, with hundreds of rooms spread over several floors. Most nights were uneventful, just the occasional complaint or lost key situation. But one evening during my shift, I noticed a room that had a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the door. At first, it was not unusual. Guests often use the sign to avoid interruptions during their stay. What caught my attention was that the sign stayed on for 3 days straight without anyone entering or leaving. By the third day, I was growing suspicious. Housekeeping had reported no activity from that room, and no calls had come from inside. But normally, if a room goes untouched for so long, we have procedures to check on the occupants for safety reasons. I reported it to my supervisor, but he told me to wait until the guest left or contacted the front desk. Curiosity gnawed at me. The cameras did not show any guests arriving or leaving that particular room during those 3 days. The door was always shut, and no sounds came from inside. It felt like the room was sealed off from the rest of the hotel, like something was wrong. On the 4th day, the front desk received a call from a guest reporting a strange smell coming from the hallway near that room. The scent was faint but unmistakably unpleasant. The manager called me and asked to investigate. I grabbed my keys and a flashlight before heading to the floor for freedom. It was heartbreaking to hear how someone she trusted had turned her life upside down. She said she felt like a prisoner disguised as a beloved partner. I wished I could have seen the signs earlier, to have reached her before things got so dark. Together we made a plan to get her out safely. It was difficult because he watched her closely and demanded constant loyalty. She was afraid of what would happen if she tried to leave, but she knew she could not live like that any longer. I promised to be there for her every step of the way, to help her regain control of her life. It was the hardest fight she had ever faced, but I admired her courage. The day she left was filled with fear and uncertainty, but also a powerful sense of relief. She packed only what she needed and slipped out while he was distracted. We went to a shelter where she could heal and start rebuilding. It was a slow process, but each day brought a little more freedom and hope. She learned that love should never come with chains. Now, months later, she is stronger than ever. She has found joy in small things again and has reconnected with friends and family. She talks about the future with excitement instead of fear. I see the spark returning to her eyes, the real light this time. Her story reminds me how important it is to listen and to be there for those we care about. In the end, she taught me that love is not about control or possession. It is about respect, trust, and freedom. She is proof that even when darkness comes, there is always a way back to the light. I am grateful she escaped, and that I could help her find her way. Together we learned that no matter how shiny the chains look, breaking free is possible and worth every step. Story 22. I was always drawn to experiences that pushed boundaries, so when I heard about a private club promising no limits adventures, I was intrigued. The invitation came through a mutual acquaintance, and the description sounded thrilling but vague. I wanted something different, something that felt real and intense, far from the usual nightlife scene. The chance to explore that side of myself without judgment was appealing. I thought it was just a place where people could let go and live freely. When I arrived at the club, the entrance was discreet. almost hidden in plain sight. The building looked ordinary from the outside, but once inside, it was another world entirely. The atmosphere was charged with energy, dim lighting casting shadows over the lavish furnishings. People moved confidently, conversations laced with excitement and secrecy. The staff were professional and attentive, guiding me through rules and expectations with a calm, serious tone. I was told that the club catered to every desire, offering experiences tailored to individual limits or the lack of them. I was assured that consent and safety were priorities, which put me at ease. That first night was a blur of sensations, new faces, whispered promises, and carefully planned encounters. It was like stepping into a dream where reality bent in strange, intoxicating ways. I was swept up in the moment, eager to see where it would take me. After a few visits, the club started to feel more like a world I belonged to. I made acquaintances who seemed as fascinated by the idea of pushing limits as I was. There was an unspoken bond between us, a trust in the experience and the people facilitating it. One evening I was invited to a special event deeper within the club, something described as beyond the usual. I accepted without hesitation, curious to discover what lay beneath the surface. The room where the event took place was behind a heavy, reinforced door I had never noticed before. It felt colder inside, the air thick with tension. The lighting was stark and clinical, a sharp contrast to the club's usual ambience. The people there were different, more serious, their faces unreadable. Something about the place unsettled me, but I was too caught up to turn away. As the night unfolded, the true nature of the club became clear. The experiences were no longer about pleasure or freedom, but about control and pain. What I thought was consensual play revealed itself as something darker, more disturbing. I watched as people were restrained and subjected to methods that were cruel and calculated. The screams and gasps filled the room, swallowed by the soundproof walls. The fear began to grow inside me, twisting my excitement into dread. I realized I had walked into an underground torture ring masquerading as a private club. The guests were not all willing participants. Some had been trapped, coerced, or deceived. The operators of the club were meticulous, hiding their true intentions behind layers of secrecy and luxury. I knew I needed to escape before I became another victim. Finding a way out was harder than I expected. The exits were guarded, and the security was tight. I watched carefully, looking for moments of distraction or opportunity. Every move I made was calculated, knowing that discovery could mean terrible consequences. The fear sharpened my senses and pushed me to stay calm, focused on survival. In the chaos of the night, I managed to slip past a distracted guard and find an emergency exit. The cold air outside hit me like a shock after the suffocating atmosphere inside. I ran without looking back, my heart pounding as I fled into the dark streets. The sounds of the city felt overwhelming yet freeing. I was safe, but shaken to my core. After escaping, I contacted the police and shared everything I had witnessed. The investigation that followed revealed the extent of the club's true nature and the horrors hidden behind its doors. Many were rescued, and the ring was dismantled, but the scars it left on those involved could not be erased easily. I realized how close I had come to becoming part of something terrible. The experience changed me deeply. It was a harsh reminder that curiosity could lead to dangerous places if caution was ignored. I learned to trust my instincts more and to question the surface of things that seemed enticing. Freedom was precious but fragile, and not everyone who promised it had good intentions. The memory of that club stayed with me as a warning and a lesson. In time, I found ways to heal and rebuild my sense of safety. I surrounded myself with people who valued honesty and respect. The darkness I had encountered made me appreciate the light in everyday moments. I kept moving forward, determined not to let fear define my future. The past would always be part of me, but it did not have to control me. Looking back, I was grateful to have escaped before it was too late. The underground club was a place of nightmares disguised as fantasy. My survival was a reminder of resilience and the power of self-awareness. I carry that experience with me, not as a burden, but as a reminder to stay vigilant and true to myself. Life is about boundaries, and knowing where to draw them makes all the difference. Story 23. Working in a sex toy factory was not something I had ever imagined for myself, but it paid the bills and had decent hours. The environment was clean, and the work was mostly assembly and quality control. I got used to the routine quickly, learning the details of different products and how each was made. There was a strange mix of humor and professionalism among the staff, which helped keep the atmosphere light. One day, a shipment arrived that looked different from the usual. The box was larger and heavier, with no clear labeling except a small sticker that said urgent. I was assigned to open and inspect the contents before they were moved to packaging. I did not think much of it at first, just another delivery to handle. When I carefully opened the box, my eyes immediately caught sight of an envelope tucked beneath the product. It was plain and unmarked, but inside was a set of instructions that made my blood run cold. The note was written in a hurried, almost frantic hand, and it detailed how to use the device to inflict harm on someone. It was not a malfunction warning or a safety protocol, it was a direct command to hurt. I froze, unsure if I had read it correctly. I looked around to make sure no one else was watching, then read it again. The instructions described methods to cause pain and injury, disguised in language that made it sound like a twisted joke. I wanted to laugh it off, but the seriousness behind the words was unmistakable. I tucked the note away and took the device out for a closer look. It looked like any other product we made, smooth and designed for pleasure. But reading the instructions made it seem sinister, like a weapon hidden in plain sight. I felt uneasy holding it in my hands. I decided to show the note to my supervisor, hoping they would know what to do. When I approached, the look on their face changed from curiosity to concern. They told me not to mention it to anyone else and that they would handle the matter. That secrecy only made me more suspicious. That afternoon, I noticed unusual activity around the shipment. A few men in plain clothes came to the factory, asking questions but avoiding details. They examined the packaging and the product, speaking quietly with my supervisor. I overheard phrases like potential threat and containment and felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to the note and what it meant. Who had sent the shipment? Was someone planning to use the product as a weapon? The questions overwhelmed me, and I felt trapped in a nightmare I could not wake from. The days passed with no clear answers. The product was removed from the production line and locked away. The factory seemed tense, like everyone was holding their breath. I started looking over my shoulder, imagining eyes watching me in the shadows. One night after my shift, I stayed late to finish a report. I heard noises coming from the storage room where the shipment was kept. Against my better judgment, I peeked inside. The device was sitting on a table, surrounded by security tags and sealed boxes. But next to it was a phone, buzzing with a message alert. Curiosity took over, and I glanced at the screen. The message was from an unknown number and contained a single sentence: "Use it before it is too late." My heart pounded, and I quickly put the phone down. Suddenly the lights flickered, and I heard footsteps approaching. I hid behind a stack of crates and held my breath. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, moving slowly toward the table. I recognized the man as someone from the plainclothes group I had seen before. He picked up the device and studied it carefully. I realized then that I was in deeper danger than I thought. I needed to get out and warn someone. But as I tried to slip away quietly, my foot caught on a box, and it fell with a loud crash. The man spun around and saw me. He did not yell or attack, but said calmly that I had no idea what was at stake. He told me that the device was part of a larger plan, one that involved power and control far beyond the factory walls. His eyes were cold and merciless. I backed away slowly and said I wanted no part of it. The man warned me that silence was my best option if I valued my safety. Terrified, I nodded and fled the building, heart pounding and breath ragged. Outside, I called 911 and reported everything I had seen and heard. The police arrived quickly and began an investigation. They took the device and the note as evidence and assured me I would be protected. The factory was temporarily closed for safety inspections. Weeks later, the authorities announced they had uncovered a plot involving illegal use of modified products in criminal activities. Several arrests were made, and the shipment was linked to a dangerous underground group. I was relieved to hear that no one had been harmed. The experience left me shaken but grateful to have escaped unharmed. I left the job soon after, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The memory of the note and that ominous device stayed with me, a constant reminder of how quickly normal life can turn dark. Now I focus on building a safer life for myself, one where trust is earned and danger is distant. The factory was just a chapter in my story, but one I will never forget. I hope the warnings I gave helped prevent something terrible, and I remind myself daily to never ignore the signs. Story 24. It was late when I saw her standing on the corner of the street, shivering and looking around nervously. Her clothes were worn, and her eyes darted constantly like she was waiting for someone or trying to escape. I hesitated at first, unsure if I should get involved, but something about her fear pulled me in. I slowed down and rolled down my window, offering her a ride. She hesitated, but then climbed into the passenger seat without a word. She barely spoke on the way to my place, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the window. I tried to make small talk, asking if she wanted some water or something to eat, but she only nodded faintly. The weight of silence between us was heavy, filled with things left unsaid. When we arrived at my apartment, I helped her inside and locked the door behind us. She finally let out a shaky breath, the tension in her shoulders easing a little. I gave her a blanket and some tea while she sat on the couch, staring at the floor. I asked if she wanted to talk, but she shook her head slowly, saying only that she was scared. I could tell there was more to her story, but I did not want to push. I told her she could stay as long as she needed. For the first time, she looked up and gave a small, grateful smile. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing noises outside, the kind that make you wonder if someone is watching. When I looked out the window, I saw a man standing across the street, his face hidden in shadows. He did not move for a long time, just stood there, watching the building. My heart pounded. I realized he must be connected to the girl I had brought inside. The next day, I stayed home, keeping an eye out for the man. He showed up again in the afternoon, this time closer, just beyond the fence. I wanted to call the police, but the girl begged me not to. She said if he knew she was trying to escape, it would only get worse. I promised to protect her and started thinking of ways to keep us both safe. I asked her more questions about who he was and why she was afraid, but she was reluctant to answer. The bits she shared painted a picture of control and fear, of a man who did not let her make her own choices. I felt anger rising inside me at the injustice of it all. I knew I could not let this continue. I decided to be cautious but ready to act. At night, I changed the locks and put a chair against the door. I installed a cheap alarm and kept my phone close. When the man came again, I did not let him near the building. I called the police and told them what was happening. The officers promised to patrol the area more often and offered to help the girl. She was scared but agreed to meet with them. With the police involved, things started to shift. The man stopped coming around as much, but I still worried. I helped the girl find a safe place to stay, far from where he could reach her. She began to open up about her life and the dangers she had faced. I listened, offering support without judgment. It felt like we were both fighting to reclaim some control. Over time, she gained strength and confidence. She found a job and started planning for her future. I watched as the fear in her eyes slowly faded, replaced by hope. I was glad I had stopped that night and offered her a ride. It was more than just kindness. It was the beginning of a new life for both of us. Looking back, I realize how small acts can make a big difference. Sometimes, all it takes is offering a safe place or a listening ear. We never know what battles others are facing, but we can choose to stand with them. I learned that courage is not just about facing danger, but about offering kindness when it is needed most. Now the nights are quieter, and the shadows outside no longer hold the same threat. The girl I helped is free, and so am I in a way I never expected. Our paths crossed by chance, but that chance changed everything. I am grateful I chose to act when I saw her fear and offered a ride. It was the start of a story with a hopeful ending. Story 25. I had never been to a fetish convention before, but curiosity got the better of me. The energy in the place was electric, full of people dressed in leather, latex, and all sorts of unusual outfits. It was a mix of excitement and nervousness as I wandered through the crowded halls, trying to take it all in. Then I saw her standing by a booth, dressed in a way that made her seem both mysterious and approachable. She smiled at me and asked if I was new to this kind of event. I admitted I was, and she offered to show me around. Her voice was calm and inviting, and I felt drawn to her confidence. We walked through the convention together, talking about the different scenes and what people were into. After a while, she leaned in and whispered that there was a private party later that night, away from the crowds. She said it was an exclusive event for those who wanted to explore more intense experiences. I hesitated but felt a mix of curiosity and trust that made me say yes. She gave me the address on a small card and told me to be there at midnight. That night, I arrived at a quiet, upscale building in a part of town I did not know well, The door was guarded by a man who checked my name against a list. When I was inside, the atmosphere was completely different from the convention. The lighting was dim, with deep reds and purples casting shadows across the room. Music pulsed through the air, and people were dressed in even more elaborate and intimidating outfits. I found her almost immediately. She was waiting by the bar, looking as calm and beautiful as before. She greeted me with a sly smile and handed me a drink. As I sipped, I started to notice the odd tension in the room. Some of the guests looked at me in a way that was more unsettling than friendly. She told me to relax and assured me that everything was safe. But as the night went on, I realized that this party was not about exploration or fun. The energy was dark and charged with something dangerous. People were whispering in corners, and I caught glimpses of things I was not meant to see. When she pulled me aside to a private room, I thought maybe it was just a quiet place to talk. Instead, she locked the door behind us and smiled in a way that sent a chill down my spine. She told me that I was going to be part of the show tonight, that I had no choice. Panic exploded inside me. I tried to reason with her, but she was cold and unyielding. The room had no windows, and the only door was locked tight. I realized then that this was not a party, it was a trap. I was a prisoner in a game I did not understand. I looked around for anything that might help me escape. The furniture was heavy and bolted down, and the walls were bare metal. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. I forced myself to stay calm and think. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside the door. I held my breath as the lock clicked and the door swung open. It was one of the guests, a man whose eyes were cold and calculating. But before he could grab me, I pushed past him and ran into the hallway. The hall was maze-like, filled with dark corridors and locked doors. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get out. The sounds of the party faded behind me, replaced by my own ragged breathing and pounding footsteps. After what felt like forever, I found a stairwell and ran down it as fast as I could. At the bottom, I saw a door leading outside. I pushed it open and stumbled into the night air, the cold hitting me like a wave of relief. I did not stop running until I reached a busy street filled with people and lights. I called the police and gave them the address of the building. They told me they would send officers right away. The next day, the news was full of stories about a raid on an illegal underground club where people were held against their will. The police arrested dozens of suspects and rescued several victims. I was shaken but grateful to be safe. In the weeks that followed, I saw a counselor to help me process what had happened. The fear and shock slowly gave way to strength and determination. I realized that trusting my instincts was the most important lesson I learned that night. I will never forget the woman who invited me, or the party that almost destroyed me. But I will also never forget the courage it took to escape and the kindness of the strangers who helped me afterward. Life has a way of testing us in the darkest moments. But sometimes those moments reveal how strong we really are. I am still learning to trust again, but I know now that my safety and my life are worth fighting for. Story 26. I had been visiting the same luxury spa for months. It was a sanctuary away from the noise of everyday life, a place where I could unwind and feel cared for. The decor was elegant with soft lighting and soothing music that made it easy to relax the moment I stepped inside. Each massage left me feeling renewed, my muscles releasing tension I hadn't even realized I was holding. The staff were always friendly and professional, greeting me by name and remembering my preferences. Over time, I began to trust the place completely. I booked appointments regularly, sometimes even twice a week, looking forward to those quiet hours. The spa became part of my routine, a small but essential luxury I allowed myself. One afternoon I arrived as usual, greeted warmly by the receptionist. After filling out the usual forms and confirming my appointment, I was led to a private room. The masseuse entered shortly after, smiling and ready to begin. The room was dimly lit with candles, the air scented with lavender. The massage started like any other, gentle at first, then gradually deeper as the therapist worked out knots in my back and shoulders. I felt my body melting into the table, the world outside slipping away. But halfway through, I noticed something strange. The door to the room closed and clicked shut behind me. I glanced over but assumed it was normal for privacy. When the session ended, I reached for my robe, ready to get up and leave. That was when I realized the door was locked. I tried the handle, but it would not budge. I called out softly, thinking maybe it was some sort of mistake or a malfunction. There was no response. My heart began to race as I knocked harder and called louder. Minutes passed and still no one came. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. I tried to keep calm, telling myself it was probably just a staff oversight and that someone would return soon. After what felt like an eternity, a key slid into the lock and the door opened slowly. A different employee stepped in, her smile forced and eyes avoiding mine. She said something about a scheduling error and apologized quickly. I gathered my things and left without another word. But the experience stayed with me. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. The next time I went back to the spa, I noticed subtle changes. The staff seemed less friendly, glancing at each other nervously. My appointments were no longer confirmed in advance, and I was always hurried through check-in. One day I overheard a conversation between two employees. They were whispering about a guest who had complained and caused problems. My stomach tightened as I realized they were talking about me. I felt like a secret had been kept from me, like there was something sinister beneath the surface of the luxurious facade. Determined to understand what was happening, I started researching the spa online. At first, I found glowing reviews from other customers, but then I stumbled upon a few posts on obscure forums. Those posts mentioned strange occurrences, guests who disappeared, unexplained lockdowns during treatments, and unusual rules about privacy. I reached out to one of the posters who claimed to have left the spa abruptly after a disturbing incident. Their story confirmed my fears. They described being locked in a room and pressured to pay exorbitant fees for extended services they never agreed to. It sounded like a trap designed to keep people captive until they surrendered. Feeling scared but resolute, I decided to report my experience to the local authorities. I gathered all the evidence I could find, including screenshots from the forums and my own documentation of the spa visits. The police took my report seriously and promised to look into it. Weeks later, the spa was investigated and temporarily shut down for questioning. Several employees were questioned about their practices and the reports of guests being detained. The owner was nowhere to be found. News outlets picked up the story, revealing that the spa had been involved in a scheme to trap customers and extort money from them. I testified in court against the spa and its operators. The process was emotionally exhausting but necessary. I was grateful to see justice moving forward, knowing that others might be protected from the same fate. The spa's reputation was destroyed, and it closed permanently. In the months that followed, I focused on healing from the trauma. I found comfort in therapy and support groups, sharing my story with others who had faced similar situations. It was empowering to know that speaking up had made a difference. Eventually, I returned to self-care, but with new boundaries and caution. I researched every new place thoroughly and trusted my instincts above all else. I found a new spa, one that valued transparency and respect. My visits there were peaceful, a stark contrast to what I had endured. Looking back, I am grateful that I escaped when I did. The experience taught me to listen to my intuition and to stand up for myself. Though the memory still lingers, it no longer controls me. I am stronger, more aware, and ready to face the world on my own terms. Story 27. I was feeling overwhelmed by life and sought peace through a silent retreat. The advertisement promised a week of meditation, quiet reflection, and healing. It seemed like the perfect escape from the noise of the world and my own restless thoughts. I signed up without hesitation, eager for a chance to reset and find clarity. When I arrived, the location was secluded, surrounded by thick forests and mountains. The building was beautiful but simple, with clean lines and minimal decoration. The air smelled fresh and earthy, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe I had found sanctuary. The other participants arrived quietly, their faces calm and expectant. The rules were strict: no speaking, no phones, no outside contact. We were given journals to write down our thoughts and exercises to complete in silence. The first day was difficult but peaceful, as my mind slowly slowed and I began to feel lighter. The instructors were soft-spoken and gentle, leading us through meditation and breath work. But on the second day, the atmosphere shifted. I noticed certain people were treated differently. They were taken aside at odd times and returned with strange expressions on their faces. There were whispered conversations between the instructors that stopped abruptly when anyone approached. I started to feel uneasy, but I told myself it was just nerves. By the third day, I realized something was wrong. The participants who had been taken away seemed more withdrawn and distant. The silence in the group felt heavy and forced, no longer peaceful. I noticed the instructors exchanged knowing looks and subtle gestures. I tried to ask questions, but the rules prevented any discussion. One night I woke up to strange sounds coming from a building nearby. It was not the usual quiet that surrounded the retreat. My heart raced as I strained to listen, but the noises stopped suddenly. I lay awake the rest of the night, unable to shake the growing dread inside me. The next morning I noticed a new participant who had not been there before. They seemed nervous and out of place. I watched as they were led away by two instructors and did not return to the group. The silence became unbearable, heavy with secrets. I knew I had to find out what was happening. During an exercise, I slipped away from the group and followed one of the instructors quietly. They led me to a hidden room behind a bookshelf. I peeked inside and saw something horrifying. The room was dimly lit, filled with ropes, chains, and other objects that did not belong in a peaceful retreat. I saw people restrained and struggling, faces full of fear and pain. The instructors were not healers but tormentors, using the retreat as a cover for cruel games. My stomach turned as I realized this was not meditation but manipulation and abuse. The silence was a tool to keep victims isolated and afraid. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. I had to escape and warn others before it was too late. I found my way back to the main hall and pretended to meditate, though my heart pounded with fear. I searched for an opportunity to leave without drawing attention. The following day, I saw a chance when the instructors gathered the group outside for a silent walk through the woods. I slipped behind a tree and ran as fast as I could. The forest was thick, but I did not stop to look back. I could hear footsteps behind me, but I kept running until I burst onto a road. A passing car stopped when I flagged it down, and I told the driver everything in a frantic rush. They called the authorities, and soon officers arrived at the retreat. The victims were rescued, and the leaders arrested. The place that promised peace was exposed as a nightmare. In the days that followed, I struggled to process what had happened. The trauma was heavy, but I was relieved to be free. I found support among counselors and others who had escaped similar horrors. Together, we began to heal and rebuild our lives. The experience taught me to trust my instincts and to question things that feel wrong. I learned that darkness can hide behind even the kindest faces. But I also learned the strength of resilience and the power of speaking out. The silence I sought became a voice for justice. Though the memory haunts me, I am determined not to be defined by it. I use my story to warn others and to help those still trapped. Peace is possible, but it must be earned and protected. Now, I move forward with caution but hope in my heart. Story 28. I never imagined my new apartment would become a nightmare. When I moved in, everything seemed normal. The building was old but affordable, and the landlord seemed friendly enough. I was relieved to finally have a place of my own after months of searching. I thought I could relax and start fresh. At first, nothing felt out of place. I unpacked my things, arranged the furniture, and tried to make it feel like home. The shower was in a small bathroom, tucked away at the back of the apartment. It was nothing special, just a simple glass door and tiled walls. I never suspected anything unusual about it. Then, one evening, while washing my hair, I noticed something strange. A small, shiny circle on the wall opposite the shower caught my eye. It was so tiny I almost missed it. I moved closer and realized it was a peephole. My heart sank. I froze, unsure if I was imagining things or if it was really there. I wiped the glass to be sure, and it did not disappear. I felt violated and scared all at once. How long had it been there? Who had been watching me? I dressed quickly and left the bathroom, my mind racing with questions. I knew I had to do something, but I did not know where to start. That night, I called a friend and told them what I had found. They urged me to contact the police immediately. I was hesitant at first, worried about making a big deal out of it. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew I had no choice. My privacy had been stolen, and I needed help. The next morning, the police arrived. They were professional and understanding, taking every detail I gave them seriously. They examined the peephole and took photographs. They asked me if I had noticed anything unusual or felt unsafe before. I told them I had not until that moment, but now I realized how wrong I had been. The officers told me they would search the apartment and the landlord's belongings with a warrant. I waited anxiously while they worked. Later, they returned with news that shook me to my core. They had found a hidden camera connected to a storage device in the landlord's office. It contained more than 20 recordings of me in the shower and other private moments. I felt sick to my stomach. The invasion was worse than I imagined. The thought that someone had been watching me without my knowledge for so long was unbearable. The police assured me that they would take care of everything, and that I was not to blame for what had happened. The investigation uncovered that the landlord had been spying on other tenants as well. Several people came forward after seeing the news, sharing similar stories of hidden cameras and secret recordings. It became clear that this was a pattern of abuse, not an isolated incident. The authorities moved quickly to arrest the landlord and confiscate all devices. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to feel safe again. My apartment no longer felt like a sanctuary. I moved out as soon as I could, finding a new place with better security and a trustworthy landlord. It was difficult to trust anyone at first, but I knew I had to try. Healing was a slow process, but I was determined. I sought counseling to deal with the emotional toll. Talking about what happened helped me reclaim control over my life. I joined a support group where others shared their stories and helped me feel less alone. Slowly, I began to rebuild my sense of security and self-worth. The legal case against the landlord went to court. I testified and shared my experience honestly and bravely. The judge took the violation seriously, and the landlord was sentenced for invasion of privacy and other crimes. It felt like justice, even if it could never undo the damage done. Now I am more cautious but stronger than before. I check every new place thoroughly, trusting my instincts and asking questions. I advocate for tenant rights and raise awareness about privacy violations. My experience has made me a voice for others who might be afraid to speak up. Despite everything, I still love having my own space and living independently. The fear has lessened, replaced by a cautious hope. I know that privacy is a right, not a privilege, and I will never stop fighting for it. My story is one of survival and resilience. I want others to know that they are not alone, and that help is available. No one deserves to be watched or violated in their own home. It is important to speak out and seek support. I am proof that even after dark moments, there can be light and healing. Life is not perfect, but I have taken back control of mine. The apartment may have held secrets, but I refuse to be silenced. I reclaimed my space, my safety, and my future. I am free now, and that is the best feeling of all. Story 29. I had been a dominatrix for several years by the time the offer came. My work was a mix of performance and control, built on clear rules and trust. I knew how to read clients, how to keep everything safe and consensual. That was the foundation, and no matter the role I played, I never crossed that line. Every session was negotiated and respected. One afternoon, I received a message from a new client. His offer was unusually high, $10,000 for a weekend session. It was tempting, far beyond what most paid. I asked for details, expecting a long list of specific fantasies or roleplay ideas. Instead, his reply was short and cryptic. He wanted complete control for the weekend, no limits, no outside contact. The tone was serious, almost cold. My instincts warned me to be cautious, but the money and curiosity pushed me to consider it. I arranged to meet him in a private location to discuss the terms face to face. When I arrived, the place looked expensive but strange, isolated from the city. He greeted me politely, but with a hard edge in his eyes. We went over the boundaries once more, and I made it clear I needed safe words and regular check-ins. He nodded but said those things were not necessary this time. That was my first mistake. The weekend began with what seemed like standard scenes. He was demanding and strict, but I was experienced enough to handle it. Then the rules started to shift. He told me I was not allowed to leave the room, not even to use the bathroom without permission. His control felt less like play and more like imprisonment. I asked him to respect our initial agreement, reminding him of the limits we set. He smiled but refused, saying this was what he had paid for. The windows were locked, and the door was guarded. I realized then that I was no longer a professional with power, but a captive in his game. Fear crept in slowly but steadily. I tried to keep calm, to reason with him, but the man I had met was gone. This was someone different, dangerous and unpredictable. He would not answer my questions or let me contact anyone. My phone was taken away, and I was left alone for hours at a time. The money I had been offered felt like a trap. As the hours passed, panic rose like a tide inside me. I tested every boundary, every chance to escape or call for help. None worked. The isolation and lack of control broke down my confidence. Yet somewhere beneath the fear, a part of me refused to give up. I started looking for weaknesses in his routine, cracks in his vigilance. At one point, he left the room for what felt like an eternity. I examined the door carefully and noticed a small gap near the floor. It was not much, but enough to slip a piece of paper through, if I could find a way. I searched the room desperately and found a pen and some scraps of paper hidden behind a drawer. I wrote a note with my location and a brief explanation. Then I waited for the right moment to send it out. When he returned, he was suspicious but distracted by a phone call. I slipped the note under the door just before he slammed it shut. The waiting afterward was unbearable. I hoped someone would find the message, but I knew it might be too late. The man checked the room thoroughly several times after that, growing angrier and more controlling. My time to act was running out. I had to find another way, one that did not depend on luck. Late in the night, when he finally fell asleep, I searched for the keys. I found them on the table, just within reach, but behind a glass case. Using a hairpin I had in my bag, I managed to open the case quietly. My hands trembled as I took the keys and unlocked the door. Freedom was close. I moved quickly but quietly, knowing every second counted. Outside the room, I found a corridor that led to the front door. It was locked with an electronic keypad, but the man's phone was still on the table in the main room. I grabbed it, hoping to call for help. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The operator answered right away. I whispered my location, describing the house and the situation. They told me to stay calm and wait for officers to arrive. I hid in the closet nearby, listening to the footsteps as they approached. My heart pounded louder than ever. The police broke down the door minutes later. The man was caught off guard, and they quickly took him into custody. I was safe but shaken. The officers treated me gently and promised to support me through what came next. I realized then how close I had come to a nightmare without an end. In the days that followed, I learned more about the man's history. He had been involved in several similar cases, but always slipped away due to lack of evidence. My note under the door had been the key to breaking the cycle. I felt a mix of relief and anger, knowing how easily things could have turned out differently. I decided to step away from my work as a dominatrix after that weekend. The line between control and captivity was too thin and dangerous. I needed time to heal and rebuild my trust in others and in myself. It was a difficult choice, but I knew it was necessary for my safety and peace of mind. Looking back, I understood the power I once held and the vulnerability that came with it. My experience taught me that no matter how strong or skilled you are, some risks are not worth taking. True control belongs only when it is shared willingly and safely. Anything else is just a shadow of freedom. Now I focus on helping others who have faced similar situations. I speak out about consent, boundaries, and the importance of trust in any relationship. The money was tempting, but nothing is worth losing yourself. I survived because I fought for my life and refused to be silenced. That weekend was a nightmare I will never forget, but it also became my turning point. I found strength I did not know I had and learned the meaning of true freedom. Sometimes the darkest moments bring the brightest lessons. I walk forward now, careful but unbroken. Story 30. I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this. When my boyfriend first suggested making an amateur tape, I hesitated. It was supposed to be something private, something just for us to share. I trusted him, believed that what we did together would stay between us. I wanted to please him, and I thought it would bring us closer. At the time, it felt exciting and a little risky in a good way. We set up the camera one evening in the bedroom, laughed nervously, and made the tape. It was awkward but intimate. I told myself no one else would ever see it. I deleted the copy from my phone, thinking that was enough to protect me. A year passed, and things between us started to change. We grew distant, fought more, and eventually broke up. I thought the tape was gone forever, just a memory locked away in a place only we had access to. I was wrong. One night, out of the blue, a friend sent me a link. I clicked it without thinking, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There I was, clear as day, on a revenge porn site I had never heard of before. The video had been posted without my consent, shared with strangers all over the world. I felt violated in a way I could not explain. The privacy I thought I had was shattered, and the pain hit me like a punch to the chest. I called my ex immediately, demanding answers. He denied everything at first, then stopped answering my calls. The helplessness was overwhelming. I was angry, scared, and ashamed all at once. I could not believe the person I had trusted had betrayed me like this. The website made it difficult to remove the content. They hid behind vague policies and refused to act unless I could provide proof it was unauthorized. I gathered everything I had, screenshots, the original video on my old devices, and messages proving I never agreed to share it publicly. I contacted legal help, but the process was slow and exhausting. Meanwhile, the messages from strangers started coming in. Some were cruel, others invasive, and a few downright threatening. I changed my phone number and blocked as many accounts as I could. I stopped going out as much, afraid someone I knew would recognize me from the video. My life became smaller and more isolated. I found support in unexpected places. A counselor helped me work through the trauma, reminding me that this was not my fault. Friends stood by me when I was ready to talk, offering comfort and strength. Slowly, I began to rebuild my confidence and reclaim control over my life. The legal battle finally resulted in the video being removed from the site. My ex was held accountable, though the damage could never be undone completely. I learned the importance of boundaries and the dangers of trusting blindly. I became an advocate for others in similar situations, sharing my story to help break the silence. Now, I am stronger than I ever thought I could be. The experience taught me resilience and the power of speaking out. I refuse to let what happened define me. I am more than a moment of betrayal. I am a survivor, and I will continue to move forward with hope and courage. Story 31. I drove escorts to their clients for money. It was not something I was proud of, but it was the only way I could make a living at the time. The work was dangerous, and I kept my head down, making sure to follow instructions and stay out of trouble. Most nights were routine, just picking up, dropping off, and collecting my cut. I never expected that one client would change everything in the worst way imaginable. That night started like any other. I picked up 2 escorts from a hotel and drove them to a quiet, upscale neighborhood where their client was waiting. The man seemed polite at first, calm and collected as he greeted us. He paid for the ride and offered a generous tip, making the job seem like it would be easy. I waited outside the house in the car, scrolling through my phone, trying to stay relaxed. Minutes passed, then longer. When the women did not come back, I began to feel uneasy. I called their phones but got no answer. I tried knocking on the door, but no one responded. A strange feeling crept over me, something that told me this was not going to end well. Suddenly the door opened, and a man stepped out, looking angry and threatening. He told me to leave immediately and that the police were on their way. Panic hit me because I had no idea what was happening inside. I tried to explain that I was just the driver, but he did not listen. Soon after, police cars arrived and officers started questioning me. They told me that 2 women were found dead inside the house, murdered in a brutal way. The evidence pointed to me, and I was arrested on the spot. I kept insisting I was innocent, that I only drove them, but no one believed me. In jail, the weight of the situation pressed down hard. I was scared and confused, trying to piece together how I had been framed. I knew the man who lived in that house was dangerous and had reasons to want me out of the way, but proving it felt impossible. My lawyer told me the case was going to be tough because of the evidence stacked against me. The client had planted my fingerprints and left messages on the escorts' phones that made it look like I was involved. I felt trapped, alone, and desperate for a break. The truth seemed buried under lies and manipulation. During the trial, I kept my story consistent, hoping someone would see the truth. I explained everything I knew about the client and how I never met him before that night. Witnesses came forward to confirm my usual work routine, but the jury seemed skeptical. The pressure was overwhelming. One night, a fellow inmate warned me about the power the client had outside the courtroom. He said the man had connections that reached far beyond the case. That warning only made me more determined to fight harder. I refused to let him win by silencing me. Then, Unexpectedly, new evidence surfaced. A detective found security footage from a nearby store showing the client entering with the escorts and leaving alone much later. It also revealed the client disposing of items that could link him to the crime. This was the break I needed. With the new evidence, my lawyer filed a motion to reopen the case. The prosecution had no choice but to drop the charges against me. I was released from jail, but the scars from the experience stayed with me. I had lost time, trust, and a part of my life. After everything, I decided to leave that world behind. The danger and betrayal had shown me how fragile life could be. I found a new path, working hard to rebuild myself honestly and safely. The memory of those nights and the 2 women who lost their lives stayed with me as a reminder to never take anything for granted. In the end, I was free, not just from the false accusations, but from the life that nearly destroyed me. I learned to trust carefully and to fight for the truth, no matter how hard the battle. The client who tried to ruin me was caught and punished for what he did. Justice came slowly but surely, and I was grateful to finally have peace. Story 32. I decided to take a pole dancing class purely for fun and fitness. It sounded like a unique way to challenge myself and learn something new.